Upstate New York has a rich history that includes many Native American legends and hauntings. There are many reports of strange happenings and inexplicable encounters in the area. In short, Upstate New York is a hotbed for this type of activity. Today we have two encounters to share with you, both coming to us from the area just north of Albany. It was the summer of 2009, and my girlfriend and I were on our yearly camping trip with her mom and dad. Her brother and his wife were there too this year. The six of us had traveled north from where we lived near Albany, New York, to a campground in the Adirondack Mountains. It was a small campground, but they did have full cabins there, as well as sites for both RVs and tents. My girlfriend's parents rented one of the cabins for a week, and we planned to set up a tent for ourselves just outside of it. The cabin itself had 2 bedrooms and an open living area with a kitchenette. We had left after work on a Friday. We ate dinner when we got there, hung out by the fire pit, and the 6 of us talked about all sorts of things and made s'mores. It was a great first night. We were all tired, though, so we headed to bed at about 9:30. We'd been up since 5 a.m. that morning, having worked a full day, so we were all pretty tired. The moon was full, so there was plenty of light around, but not enough details to see beyond 20 feet or so. I pitched our tent relatively close to the cabin because of that. My girlfriend's brother and his wife pitched their tent on the far side of the cabin, about 50 feet away. And about an hour later, I was awoken by my girlfriend, who had said she heard something outside our tent, but couldn't see anything out the window because it got so dark. She thought it sounded like heavy footsteps walking through leaves and twigs as it moved around our site. We were near the center of the campground where there weren't too many trees. I listened a bit, but could barely lift my head. I was so tired. Also, I didn't hear anything, so I told her not to worry and that whatever it was would probably move on soon. It was probably just some forest animal checking out our scents. I instantly went back to sleep, but I woke up again when she nudged me awake a few minutes later, saying that whatever it was had moved closer. She said she could hear breathing outside the tent and felt like something was looking at her through the mesh window on the door. I reluctantly gave in and woke myself up to check out what might be going on. I told her not to move, and I slowly unzipped the door of our tent. As soon as I did, my girlfriend let out a scream because something jumped from the area right outside our door and jumped into the trees right across from the tent. We both saw it at the same time, very quickly, before it darted behind the trees and then stopped and looked back at us. It was about 7 feet tall, muscular, had a large head with long hair. The creature didn't seem aggressive, but instead seemed curious as it stood there staring at us for what felt like a long time. It had yellow eyes that almost glowed in the dark, and I feel I saw a mouth with sharp teeth. After standing there for a few seconds, it turned and slowly walked away into the woods on the other side of the campground. I then unzipped the tent door all the way and stepped outside very cautiously. I looked in the direction that it had gone, but I couldn't see anything in the dark, so I stood there a bit listening before I went back inside the tent and zipped it up. I was now doubting if we had really seen anything at all, but at the same time, we both just laid there in our sleeping bags for several minutes, not saying anything and barely breathing. We were both in shock at what had just happened. We stayed awake for probably the next 2 hours, and we did both hear distant screaming noises a few times that night. But somehow we both finally fell asleep, although I have to admit I had dreams of being chased and running for my life through the forest that night. The next day, when we all got up and were making breakfast, I told my girlfriend's brother about what happened. I asked him if he had heard or seen anything at all, but he said he hadn't, so it was looking as if only my girlfriend and I had experienced it, if it even was something. But later that day, after a morning hike, we were sitting in the cabin with her mom and dad when one of the campground managers came by with his dog. The dog looked like a German Shepherd mix. The dog was acting very strangely, as if he had spotted or smelled something unusual in the area and was trying to pull his owner towards it. The manager passed the time a bit talking to us, checking in on us, before finally asking if we had seen anything like a bear around recently, saying that his dog seemed to be very interested in our area specifically. He was wondering what could possibly be up. When we told him no, he seemed relieved, but said that he had received a report from other campers. They said they had seen a large black bear in the area and that it was smart enough to have learned how to open up their locked food storage containers. I don't know if what we saw was a bear or not, but I do know that bears don't usually stand 7 feet tall or walk on their back legs. Also, I'm pretty sure bears are nocturnal, so there's that. So what exactly did we see that night? I'm not sure, but it was definitely something very strange and out of the ordinary, and my wife and I are confident that it wasn't just a black bear, but something much more. And the fact that other campers had reported seeing something similar in the area lends credibility to our story. Have you ever had a similar encounter while camping, hiking, anything? Or do you know of anyone who has? If so, please share your story in the comments below. Hearing from other people who feel the same as we do has been helping us keep our sanity. 2 of my friends and I were headed to Grafton Lake State Park in New York on a Sunday evening in the summer of 2005. We were on summer break from college and were going to camp that night nearby and head into the park and over to the lake in the morning. We were trying to get there in enough time to set up camp before it got too dark. I remember it was around 5 o'clock at night. We had the windows down and were enjoying the scenery as well as celebrating the end of the day since we had all worked that day at our respective summer jobs. All of a sudden, my friend sitting in the back seat yells behind me, "What was that?" I looked at him, and he had his head tilted out the window, staring out into the woods and pointing. I looked out my window in the direction he was pointing, and I saw this large, bipedal creature running through the woods, its image flashing in my mind as it ran and flickered behind the trees. It was hard to tell exactly how far away it was because the thing seemed huge. I would put it at about 7 feet or more and about 50 yards or so away. One thing about it that really confused me was the way it ran. It was very odd. It seemed to be running on 2 legs, but its arms were swinging back and forth like the way a human would run, and its head was bobbing up and down as it ran, which made me think that maybe it was chasing something and trying to keep its eye on some kind of prey. I had never seen anything like this before, so my mind started racing with all of the possible explanations of what I could have been looking at. We sat there staring out the window for about 10 seconds or so, trying to make sense of what we had just seen when suddenly from behind us came this loud bang and it shook the entire car. My friend who was driving slammed on the brakes and we all turned around to see that the back window of the car was shattered. But there was no reason for that to have happened. We weren't near anything that could have caused it to break. No falling trees or flying rocks, and there was no wind outside. I remember being terrified and thinking how weird it was that we simultaneously were looking at this strange animal, and at the same time our back window basically explodes. I looked again into the trees, but super scared of actually seeing anything again. But it was gone. Worse yet, I kept thinking about how the sun was starting to go down, and we knew that it would get dark very quickly after that. My friends and I were totally unable to make sense of what was happening, so we decided to just drive up a little further before we checked anything out, in case whatever we had been looking at came back out again. We definitely did not want that to happen. We drove maybe another 1/4 of a mile up the road before pulling over to the side and getting out of the car and assessing the damage. The back window was completely shattered, but there were no pieces of glass inside the car because the window was still sort of intact. I guess that's a safety thing on cars. Looking at the windshield all cracked like that, it was a big awakening to us, even though I think we probably had it in our minds that we could originally continue on to the campsite. We unanimously decided that it was best if we just drove back home and forgot about the whole overnight thing. So we turned the car around in the middle of the road and headed back down towards where everything had taken place. We had no choice but to go back that way if we wanted to go home, unfortunately. So then as soon as we got back to the area where we saw the creature, my friend yelled, "There it is!" I squinted and looked up ahead of us into the trees, but there was this huge rock on the side of the road. I originally thought that he had meant he had seen the creature again and was yelling about that. But he said, "No, look at the rock. That's what hit us." We stopped the car to look at it. The rock was huge. No one could have ever lifted that thing that I knew of and thrown it the way it came at us. We all just looked at each other in disbelief, but quickly continued driving away. We didn't say much to each other after that. We were all in shock. Honestly, the rock looked like it could have weighed 100 pounds, and it would have had to have been hurled from quite a distance. So thinking about the thing that we had just seen moments earlier made me believe that whatever it was stronger than I wanted to think. I mean, to be able to pick up that rock and throw it at our car. As I was thinking about all of that, suddenly to our right, something in the woods caught our attention and we all yelled. We were definitely on edge. We quickly turned our heads in the direction to see what it was, but we were sure to keep the car going this time. And again, we saw the huge creature, and it appeared to be bipedal and running on 2 legs, just like the first time. But this time it was darker outside, and we could now see large, glowing eyes. And again, its arms were swinging back and forth as it ran. Obviously, we had never seen anything like this before this day, and now twice. So our minds were racing with the possible explanations. Our brains were trying to make logical sense out of all of it. But whatever it was had already disappeared back into the woods again. This time, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that whatever we had seen, both of these times, was definitely not human. There was no stopping us from going home now. We drove as fast as we could down the road. We didn't want to be near those woods at all. And I'm pretty sure that whatever was in there obviously did not want us there, or anywhere in the area. As we drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what else might be out there in those woods waiting to be discovered, or if there were more than one of what we saw. Because thinking of how that rock came at us from behind, I sort of think there was more than one. When we got home, we didn't tell our parents or anyone else what had happened. I personally was scared and didn't want to be made fun of or ridiculed by anyone. But I still think about that day. I think about it often, and I wonder. I've never seen anything like it since, thank goodness, but I can say with 100% conviction that whatever it was definitely not a human figure. Do you think that there are creatures like this one, waiting to be discovered? What do you think this creature was? Please let me know so I can get some rest.